realized that I was a very good strategy consultant, but I had no idea how to implement my strategies. Just make reasonable assumptions, be transparent about your assumptions, and just get to a directionally correct answer. And directionally correct is much, much better than a blank page. So the fastest path forward is just to find people who do. And the most important thing is kind of like, just check your ego, right? And then once you're done checking your ego, check it again. You can be absolutely brilliant, but to do big things, you need a lot of good people. If you're always the smartest guy or the smartest gal in the room, you're in the wrong room. So just deliver, because I think, if you gain a reputation of someone who can take on difficult challenges and just get things done, influence will come, and progression will come as well.
You're listening to Data Analytics Chat, where data meets career.
Welcome to Data Analytics Chat, the podcast where we discuss the world of data, AI, and the careers shaping it. My guest today is Ilya Meyzin, who is the SVP Head of AI Solutions at Dun & Bradstreet. In this episode, we will explore his journey, the challenges and insights he has learned during his career. And in the data topic, we'll look at the rise on AI agents. Ilya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you for having me on your show.
Not a problem. The topic is a popular one and everyone's getting involved with this.
Absolutely.
Simon, do you want to start off with introduce yourself and sharing your career journey?
Yeah, sure. So like you said, I'm the head of AI solutions at Dun & Bradstreet. Obviously, we're doing a lot with AI and agents and all things LLM. My career path has been anything but linear. So I started out in management consulting, then moved into strategy, worked with private equity shops a lot, large corporates, kind of like never specialized in any industry vertical, and did everything under the sun from automotive to aviation, metals, retail, consumer products, which was great for me. It suits my personality. I really like learning, and actually I get bored pretty quickly. So then at some point, I realized that I was a good strategy professional, but I didn't know anything about what it takes to actually implement strategies. So I started looking to transition more into implementation roles, so to speak. And then came to Dun & Bradstreet about 12 years ago, started in strategic business planning, and then did a lot of really interesting things across the company, from technology, finance, and eventually found my home in data science and AI, which again, just like it's a perfect field for someone who really likes variety and gets bored pretty quickly, because AI, it's not really a discipline. It's just a collection of tools and solutions that can be applied to an infinite range of problems, really. So I keep learning every day, and we're incredibly busy with all the cool AI and agentic stuff. So it's been really great.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one to keep on your toes and to keep learning this at the moment.
Yeah.
With yourself, you mentioned you're one that is sort of open to working in many different industries. Do you think that's just more down to because obviously a lot of businesses want people that have got the domain expertise, and I guess there's always that element of, can someone learn a new industry? Was that just something you picked up as a sort of in your sort of consulting days?
Yeah, I think it was just a combination of things. The consulting group that I was working for was relatively small, so everybody kind of expected to be able to do everything. And then once I got into the mode of doing that, I discovered that I really enjoy it, because, it can be very stressful because you're constantly learning new things, and you're never doing anything twice. So there's a little bit of stress, and the learning curve is always very steep, but it's just like, it's a lot of fun because, like I said, you keep learning and you're developing a very broad perspective on things. And then you can start, at some point, you realize that you can draw some higher level inferences about, like all these seemingly disparate industries, but you kind of like you start seeing patterns, and that really helps, and I've kind of, once I discovered that I really enjoy that and I'm okay, like putting up with a little bit of stress that comes with, like I have to get up to speed on this thing in 2, 3 weeks. I realized that I really, really like it. And I've always tried to sort of like look for roles that allow me to do that.
Okay, brilliant. And then, so if you had to pinpoint one or two defining moments that's changed your career, what would they be?
So, the pivot from strategy to implementation. So, I mentioned I realized that I was a very good strategy consultant, but I had no idea how to implement my strategies. And then actually, I got that feedback from a very senior person in the firm I was working for. And, in the moment, I was taken aback, like walk out of the meeting and you mumble all kinds of words under your breath as like, what does Of course I know how to implement. But then, like I took a hard look at myself. I was like, well, yeah, like I've always been a consultant. So what do I know? And that was really the point when I started looking for roles outside of consulting, and really like looking for roles that were not even on the strategy side, that were much more on implementation side. So that was a very, and with 12 or so years later, or 13 years later, I'm really happy that I did this pivot. Like obviously, like what I discovered is the world is infinitely messier and complicated, more complicated, and like things that look great on a piece of paper, they just don't work, right? So it's kind of like, I, before I switched to industry as consultants say, I didn't truly realize that I didn't have the full picture of the world. So that was one very important moment. Another one, I would say, like learning to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. And there's one very clear moment that like I always go back to in my mind. Back in my consulting days, I was on a project where I had to build what consultants call a supply curve. Basically, it's an analysis and a framework of which producers in a specific industry can profit at different price levels and who's going to be essentially like priced out of production. I had to do that for ethanol, which is, like ethanol is a really complex industry. Like you can make ethanol from pretty much anything, right? Like you could make ethanol from like stale beer. And then, like the ethanol prices are linked to multiple commodities, oil and corn and sugar, and there's regulations and subsidies all over the place. Capacity was surging. So, it was an impossible thing to seemingly to analyze. And I complained to my mentor, Mark Kolofchenko, who is now a senior partner at KPMG, that it was an impossible task. And basically, like nobody on earth knew the answer, right? And Mark's response was, that's right. That's exactly why the client is paying us. And then he kind of explained to me that everybody knows that you don't have a magic wand. Yeah, like nobody expects you to give a perfect answer. Just make reasonable assumptions, be transparent about your assumptions, and just get to a directionally correct answer. And directionally correct is much, much better than a blank page. And so that advice that I got from him just completely reframed how I think about really difficult problems. And it probably has helped me more in my career than just about anything else, right? So I kind of like, I've always had to operate in environments where, like I said, it's the first time I'm doing something, things are very much in flux. There's never enough information to make decisions. And actually, most of the time, I don't even know if I have enough information to make a decision, right? So that ability to just like separate things into what's knowable, what's not knowable, understand the risks of not knowing stuff. It's just finding a way to move forward and starting to do things. Like without that masterclass from Mark, like honestly, I don't think I would have been nearly as successful in my career.
Amazing. I think, yeah, like you said, it's something, right, starting something, it gets your brain going, doesn't it? The
Yeah,
creativity
exactly.
sparks. And
Exactly.
things
Just
just start, your brain starts getting creative and then new ideas pop up and things happen, doesn't it?
exactly. Yeah. And then like you get feedback from your environment, like you try things, some things work, some things don't work. Like the most important thing is just to get going. So
And sometimes
avoid
that's the
like
hardest bit.
another, yeah, and another favorite consulting term, like just avoid analysis paralysis, right?
Yeah. Sometimes starting, you get so worked up, don't you? And then you end up,
Yes.
yeah, you just
Yes.
need to
Right.
get something written down.
Right.
Brilliant. So what's been the tough challenges that you faced along the way? And I guess how have you overcome them?
So I mean, it's like I mentioned, right? Like I make it sound like a lot of fun, like constantly learning and doing new things, but there is that element of stress and sort of like constant discomfort because you're always doing things that you've never done before. And like sometimes you have weeks or even days to just learn something completely new. Like back in consulting was a new industry or like in AI, like the pace of change is so quick that something that was state of the art a few months ago is outdated today. And I think the way I've always gone about it is just like figure out who the real experts are, right? So when you're tackling something new, you don't even know what you don't know. So the fastest path forward is just find people who do. And the most important thing is kind of like just check your ego, right? And then once you're done checking your ego, check it again. So I literally call people every day and say, forgive me, but I'm about to ask you a lot of really dumb questions. Please bear with me. Um, and that mindset has served me incredibly well, right? So you have 3, 4 conversations with the right people and you sort of like start seeing the contours of the problem space, right? So suddenly you understand what there is to know, what you need to know, and what you still don't know. And that's a huge win, right? When you can finally map out the landscape, that's a huge win. And you can go deeper, ask better questions, start connecting the dots, etc. Right. So I think, like that's ultimately this is how I've handled all these big challenges, just like staying curious, being patient, and surrounding myself with people who know much more than I do, and just being honest with myself and with the environment. Is like, this is something that I don't know anything about. Help me get up to speed.
Kind of good. And then you mentioned learning's been quite key for you.
Yeah.
How, I mean, obviously, like, you've been successful to get to leadership, and there's many people out there that want to do it, but maybe uncertain or feel they lack the skills. How's your career progressed into leadership? Is there been any particular, have you had mentors, training? Was it been self-study? How have you gone about it?
Yeah, I've always had an incredible fortune of working for very smart, very successful people who I've learned from a tremendous amount. But also I've always had the great fortune of being surrounded by incredible team members because at the end of the day, I don't like it, if someone juniors or like aspiring leaders are listening to this, the most important thing to understand that it's all about people, right? Sometimes we get so wrapped up and we're solving this analytic problem or this is the thing that we're building. It's all about people. And as you progress, your success singularly depends on who you work with and your team members and the collaboration that you build with them and the relationships. So it's more than anything, it's like people are people, right? Like people give their best when they feel understood and they feel appreciated and see how their work is creating genuine impact. So I think it's critical to remember that like you can be absolutely brilliant, but to do big things, you need a lot of good people to support you and drive that thing alongside with you. And I guess, so that's one thing. And another thing would be what has worked really well for me is the ability to play in multiple worlds, right? My degree actually is in philosophy, but I have enough physics and math background to hold my own with very quantitative PhDs. And then I have my strategy background, so at my core, I am quote unquote a business person, right? But obviously I'm very comfortable operating in the, AI data science world and leading these incredibly capable, more technical resources. So that ability kind of like to be on the intersection of the business and the AI has been incredibly helpful in my career, just like blending technical insights, analytical insights, strategic insights, and just like going in and out of both those worlds, right? And there's so many like AI is creating so many really interesting opportunities for people to do that, to play in both worlds. Like one example that like I kind of like talking about. So without getting too technical, that you can take the way large language models, one of the things that they do, you can take a lot of unstructured text and you can turn that unstructured text into what they call like vector embeddings, right? Which is basically like numeric representation of that text, a lot of ones and zeros, right? So there's this interesting question in my head. So when somebody does that, when you take, let's say, a document and then you create a vector embedded representation of that document, is that the same data but in a different format? Or is that a completely new artifact? And the reason it's important is because like when you're talking about the legal aspect of AI, like contractual aspect of AI, so that's a really important question, right? When let's say your customer takes your data and creates embeddings out of it, is that a derivative output or is it basically the same data just in a different format? So I think, so that's an example, like lawyers who will be able to engage with these issues that didn't exist, like even, like 2, 3 years ago, they'll have a lot of work. And like, I think it's going to be really interesting work. I think, like I said, like AI is creating a lot of these opportunities to be playing in multiple domains. And I think it's fun. And there's not that many people who can do that. So, that's a pretty good way to get going with or accelerate your career rather.
Yeah, I definitely think now the skill set is changing, isn't it? You need to blend the skills now, I think.
Yeah,
You need, obviously, the technical skills. Yeah, if you can talk, obviously, there's so many different roles as well, but you need technical skills are getting less technical now because you've got the heavy lifting being done. So you need to now have that business knowledge, strategy. It's just evolving, isn't it? Now, I think if you're a data scientist now, and you're pure techie, I think you need to start learning them business skills because you're going to
exactly.
need to be able to communicate with the business and add value. Or your role's just going to get bored.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And like, the AI is blending so much, all these agentic capabilities. In a few years, if you're a business leader who doesn't really understand these tools or these technologies, I think you're really locking yourself out of a huge part of like the problems that you can credibly try to solve. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
And you mentioned you've got a blend of good skills. So is there anything else that sort of helped you progress into leadership?
I mean, like I said, like I've been very, very lucky. I've always worked for and with incredibly good people. And the way I sort of like think about it, if you're always the smartest guy or the smartest gal in the room, you're in the wrong room. I think every person on teams that I've had the privilege to lead is much better than me at many things. And that's great. That's how it should be, if you ask me. Like, so I don't try to kind of like pretend that this is not the case. I lean into it. I want people to be better than me and know things that I don't know and I can learn from them. I think that's been really critical for me. Then, so the another thing is I'm pretty crazy about protecting my focus, right? There's just like so much stuff going on, and the pace is just unrelenting, right? So even if days were 72-hour long, not 24 hours, if I engaged with everything that I can engage, I wouldn't get anything done. And that's one of the skills that I learned in consulting, because sometimes we would do projects where we had to help a private equity shop make a decision about buying a company and not buying a company. And we had like 3 weeks to learn about a target company and completely new space. So if that's the timelines that you're operating with, then you learn very quickly to separate things into those that are critical to understand in this context and things that are nice to have to understand, right? So it's sort of like I've been applying the same mindset also to problems, right? Like, so I'm trying to do whatever I'm trying to do, what is critical, what is not critical. And it's just like I don't have the luxury of engaging things that are not critical. And that's actually really helpful, right? So you end up doing more, and you end up doing bigger things that drive bigger value for your company or your organization. Yeah, I think we talked about the ability to play in multiple worlds. And I guess, like this last but very much not least, maybe it is the most important thing, is build credibility before you seek influence, right? So just deliver, 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 because I think, if you gain a reputation of someone who can take on difficult challenges and just get things done, influence will come, like, and progression will come as well. So that's probably the main thing.
Yeah, I like him comment about the focus, because I think that it is key, isn't it? I mean, there's so much going on, and you need to, what's going to move the needle, basically, isn't it? What's the
Exactly.
big thing? And again, that's the same with business. I think everyone's got a bit lost with generative AI, haven't they? Again, there's so many projects you want to do. You need to, what's going to impact the business right now? Because there'll be so much you want to do in the business now. There's so much opportunity now, but it's the current challenge, isn't it, really? You need to focus on what's going to be
Right.
the big impact for you right now.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So if say I was an aspiring leader, what advice would you give myself?
Nice to give yourself. Um, that's a great question. I think, everything. So you're in a really interesting position because you get to talk to people from many different walks of life and different roles and many different industries. So you kind of, like, to do successfully what you do on this podcast. So you must be curious, and you must be willing to engage with things that you maybe don't know much about. And sounds like you're doing really, really well with that.
Hope so. That's fine. Okay. So let's tap into the question then on AI agents. Obviously, this is massive next evolution. Obviously, brings many opportunities, and this is obviously challenges and risks in the business environment. So obviously push as the next layer on top of LLMs. In your view, what capabilities do they unlock that base models cannot achieve on their own right now?
This is an awesome question. This is really, like, truly foundational to understand. So there's a couple of things, right? So first of all, LLMs understand and agents do, right? So there's a huge progression from LLMs that are essentially like passive interlocutors or assistants, whereas agents are active problem solvers, like a digital coworker that can reason, plan, and execute things. So just to get like a tad more technical, agents add state, planning, memory, and tool usage, right? So planning, memory, and tool usage, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Let me talk a little bit about state. So LLMs are awesome at understanding and generating language, but they're not inherently stateful, right? They don't retain goals. They don't retain memory or continuity beyond the current context, right? And so agents add that missing layer of planning and memory and action. They can decide what to do next. They can call external tools. They can coordinate steps over time. So, and all those things is just, again, like just to bring it back, like LLMs talk, LLMs can converse with you, but agents can actually do things, and like pretty complex things at that. So, and speaking of complexity, so the other thing is agents, I apologize, lost my voice. I'm so sorry. Agents can decompose large complex problems into smaller tasks and orchestrate how those tasks are solved. Something that even smartest models, smartest LLMs really struggle with, right? So you can, like, if you ask even the smartest LLM in the world to interact with petabytes of diverse data and ask it to derive conclusions from that data, it's too much, right? Like, it's just too much data, and there's too much variety, and there's too much complexity. So LLMs in these situations hallucinate like crazy. They just make things up. Like, their answers sound very confident, but factually, there are a lot of inaccuracies. So agents, on the other hand, work very differently. They embrace tool use. They can call APIs. They can run database queries. They can delegate to specialist sub-agents. And the beauty is, so those tools or sub-agents or APIs, they can be specialists, like in just one thing, right? So you can have an agentic tool that is only good at retrieving, like in our world, for example, data about ESG, right? And then you'll have ESG data, and then you'll have another tool that is exceptionally good at retrieving data about, I don't know, like news about a company, right? And all those specialist tools, they'll be extremely good. They will use deterministic mechanisms of finding that information, meaning, like they will convert fluid conversational language from the user into whatever, like SQL calls or whatever, right? And by breaking the problem down into a bunch of smaller pieces, for each piece you have a specialist that is really, really good at doing that particular thing. So suddenly you can handle like enormous amounts of data and very complex, multifaceted user queries. And you can do that very successfully, right? And that's just huge, right? Like, it's, even today, even like the biggest, smartest LLMs, they hallucinate quite a bit. So it's like I said, like, you can't just unleash them directly in the business context. Like you can't afford, your tolerance for hallucination is extremely small. Like, you can't even afford 5% of hallucinations. So that in those environments, like, you really need to bring in agents that are exceptionally good at breaking those enormous problems down and just solving them one step at a time.
So what would be like a telltale sign for high value use case for agents then?
So I think there's a couple of things, right? So obviously, everything that you do, like, it needs to have clear value, right? Like if you're deploying an agent, you need to understand why you're doing it. What's the value that you want to drive, be it time savings or new revenue or efficiencies, or you can just, in some cases, you can do something they were not able to do previously. So the first thing is like, what's the actual tangible impact, right? Yeah, so that's sort of a given, right? That specifically for agents, I think repeatability is a big thing. If there is a workflow or a task that happens often enough, and it's sort of like more or less the same thing that is being done repeatedly over time, that's a really good signal that this is something where an agent can be quite impactful. Also, complexity is actually, like, I would say that complexity is, and by complexity, I mean a task may require reasoning and context, right? So you're not just like, not a single deterministic answer, because like we said a little bit earlier, like agents can actually break down problems, figure out what path to choose, which tools to use, and which sequence. So if there's a little bit of complexity, that's also really good. And I guess, like there's also a dose of realism. Agents are very, very powerful tools, but it's not like it's a magic wand. So the sort of like the way to think about it is, if you drop the brilliant person into the same task and ask them to do it, would they say, yep, I've got everything that I need to do this task? Or would they say, you didn't give me the data or the right tools to execute this task? If it's the latter, then agents are not going to be successful to execute. Again, like super, super powerful, but they can't create something out of nothing. It means that if that's the answer, then it means that you have to do some pre-work before deploying agents into the space. And of course, in enterprise contexts, of course, you have to be very mindful about regulatory compliance and sort of like government contexts. There are some use cases that are inherently riskier than other use cases. And you just need to understand very well the risk profiles of different use cases and judge accordingly if this is something that you're very comfortable deploying agents into, or something that maybe you want to wait for a few months to get more clarity. So I would say just to kind of like recap: impact, repeatability, some complexity, some like just realism, right? And just remembering to think of regulatory and compliance stuff.
So does that mean, this is a new thing for businesses now. So does this mean you need to when you get involved in this has got to be bringing in multiple different departments within the business to cover bases? So it's a lot more team effort now.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like I always say that Gen AI or agents, it's a team sport. It truly is, right? If you have a bunch of super smart people doing something in the basement, I don't think it's going to scale. I don't think it's going to succeed. So you really need to have, like different people call it differently. Like I've heard the name Gen AI pod. Like you have to have your product people, you have to have your technology people, you need to have legal, cybersecurity, like all the folks who commercialize things. So all the sort of like, how do we price it? How do we bill it? How do we manage usage? So you got to have, and I'm probably forgetting a bunch of important functions, right? So if you don't have all that as a cohesive group or cohesive team, it's going to be pretty hard to deploy at scale.
And then also many pilots fail to scale. So what are the hidden blockers that organizations overlook when deploying agents?
So, it's interesting. Complexity doesn't scale linearly. It kind of scales exponentially. I'm so sorry. I'm still having my voice issues. So if you prototype an agent that works on a small, clean sliver of data for a pretty narrow use case, you can't assume that it will behave the same way when it's exposed to the full scope of your data or workflows, right? So you may, something that works beautifully at small scale, you may discover that when you scaled up, you're running into memory limits, context window constraints, retrieval quality, orchestration load. And it's like all the things that don't show up in your demos, but they will show up in production. So that's one. Second, you got to have agent ready data, right? Like agents can only reason as well as the data that they can see and interact with. So you need to make sure that you have the right data for the agents to work with, meaning your data has to be trusted, timely, contextual. If it's sort of like locked in silos or poorly mapped, or you can just, you can't trust your data. That's it's going to be pretty hard to do anything at scale. And then there's this interesting concept of like signal to noise ratio, right? So let's say you do have agent ready data. So what's really important is to not overwhelm the agent with data that it doesn't really need to solve the problems that you want it to solve. So it's sort of like, if I go back to my, like if you dropped a really smart person into the problem, would they be able to do it? Like they say that most people can remember and repeat back only about 7 to 10 digits. If you tried to make people memorize 20 digits or 30 digits, almost everyone would fail, right? And there comes a point, like you get to 50 digits, like 99.9% of people would fail. And it's the same thing with agents, right? Like the more data you throw at them, the higher the probability that they will get confused and will start hallucinating. So the challenge is not to stuff more data in the context window. Like you really got to know what is the right data and the most impactful data that you want to bring into the problem. So this is not, like the more the better. Like you need to have, like, this is the most impactful data that I can bring into this problem. So, and I think it's interesting that this concept of context engineering, it's really starting to evolve. So it's definitely an area to watch as you're scaling. And of course, like it goes without saying, you got to have the right infrastructure. Like some pilots often run on sort of like highly bespoke setups, which don't translate into production, right? Because, like just because something runs, well enough for your pilot, you may very quickly discover that setup that you have to run the pilot is way too expensive to run in production, right? And like I said, like some things just don't scale. So the question is not when you do your pilot, the question is not like, hey, can I get it to work? The question really should be, can I get it to work 10,000 times a day reliably at enterprise level? So I think these are the big things.
Yeah, no, definitely hearing a lot around data quality is getting so key now, isn't it? A project.
Yeah, exactly. It's sometimes what's really interesting. LLMs can do amazing things, and then you throw agents into the mix. And I look at what my team creates and I'm like, wow, this is science fiction, right? I'm in it 24/7, but I still have those moments. Like I look at the stuff that they're building, I'm like, wow, like I literally can't believe what I'm seeing. But so sometimes like we get really anchored on that we forget like agents are still software, right? Like the old garbage in, garbage out, as smart and capable as agents are, like you put that data in, you're going to get that stuff out. So yeah, having the right data, trusted, timely, contextualized, accurate, obviously, that is, yeah, you're going to fail if you don't have all that.
A lot of people said, especially with LLMs, like building an LLM is easy, or was the easier part. The back, like the getting data is the hardest bit. Is that the same with building agents?
So it's an interesting question, right? Building good agents is pretty hard, right? It takes a lot of very specialized skills, ability to innovate very, very quickly. So I would say it's both, right? Like you do need excellent teams and excellent infrastructure and like just excellent sort of like innovation process. But yeah, you can't do, even if you're exceptionally good at building stuff, you're not going to be successful if you don't have great data. So you really need both.
Okay. Perfect. And how do you separate orchestration complexity from genuine intelligence?
See, that's a really interesting question. Like intelligence is a very loaded term. And I have a degree in philosophy. During my time at Yale, actually, I took a seminar with Nick Bostrom, who is one of the leading thinkers in philosophy of AI. So I can debate intelligence and what that means and whether we have it or not until the cows come home. I think honestly, like I will punt a little bit on the intelligence thing, and instead I will say that in practice, the real metric is not intelligence but value, right? So to
Yeah.
me, the real question is, are agents creating value beyond, like your traditional workflows or, what automation could deliver? And to me, the answer is an unequivocal yes. I think, I think so. It's interesting. Like sometimes when people say agents, they think of like early day agents that didn't really have agency or autonomy. They were really just like very sophisticated workflows wrapped around an LLM, like executing static plans with style and flair, right? And that's sort of like that linear chains of things that agents were asked to execute. That's where like the term chain of thought came from. There's just linear chains of execution. But now the agents that we have today with memory, like really good memory and planning and tool usage, they truly can act autonomously and decide how to approach a problem instead of following a fixed script, right? So, and I mentioned agents are stateful. Um, they don't start from scratch with every request. Like they remember prior steps and they can track goals. They can track their execution against the goals, and they can adjust their next move based on outcomes, right? So they don't have to move linearly through predefined paths anymore, right? They can navigate dynamically through almost like a graph of actions that they can take, like, and then they can choose the most relevant path in real time. They have the autonomy to loop back, skip steps, like change course when new information comes in. It's really like pretty similar to how humans solve problems, right? So I think, like the agents that we have today absolutely add tremendous value on top of what those early day agents were bringing to the table. And it's important to remember, like, it feels like there's so much has happened and the pace of innovation is so quick that it feels like these things have been around forever. We're still very early days of this agentic revolution. We'll get to a place where these systems can learn and they can adapt. They can continuously improve outcomes. I know that I totally punted on intelligence, but yeah, to me the value is unquestionably there. I see it every day, many times. When the beauty is we've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, yeah, true. Like, it's still early days, isn't it? Like, it's
Yeah,
again, this is where this obviously you've got the technical knowledge, but also if you've got the business domain expertise here, like how can you actually again add value to the business? You're gonna add
exactly.
so much more power to what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. Exactly.
So is there like a big risk in over reliance on agents for businesses?
Um, I think it's a little bit of what I said earlier. Unbelievably powerful tools, frameworks, when well designed, they can do amazing things. But agents are software, albeit software with autonomy to make very complex decisions and based on complex inputs, all that stuff, right? But like it's really important not to get complacent and just like stay on top of how those environments evolve and how inputs shift over time. So I would say, like today, agents should augment human judgment, but you shouldn't just say, all right, like we have an agent running, like we can go fishing for the rest of the month, right? Like maybe it will happen very, very quickly as models get better and these frameworks get better. Like maybe we will be able to rely on these things more. But again, like unbelievably powerful tools, but it's important to remember that today they're tools. So yeah, I think it's really important to stay on top of like to monitor what goes in, monitor what goes out, track performance really, really closely. And there's some, like really powerful tools that allow you to do that today, right? Like that can see all the like prompts, for example, into an agentic system and see all the outputs and do some like extremely intelligent things like analyzing outputs from the quality perspective and like even governance, right? Like, so I think the risk is forgetting that we still need people very closely involved with these powerful tools.
That's definitely
Yeah, definitely.
cool. So then if we look, say, 2 to 3 years ahead, do you see agents becoming embedded into the enterprise architecture, or is it going to be more of a like a niche tactical tool for businesses?
I think it's definitely the former. I think agents will become very embedded and, like in a way, they'll simply be how enterprise systems work, right? So you'll see agentic capabilities built directly into CRMs, ERPs, master data management platforms, often behind the scenes, sort of like similar to how APIs operate today. And I think, the key enabler of that embeddedness is going to be standardization, right? So if you take things like Model Context Protocol, MCP, they will make a lot of data, like MCP will make a lot of really, really good data sets, it will make really good data sets like agent ready. They will make really good data sets more accessible, well described, easier for agents to consume and understand. So MCP will give agents a common language to use for communications across systems, right? So that's going to be a very, very important driver of that embeddedness. The other one is going to be A2A, or, like the protocol for agent to agent collaboration. I think, maybe it hasn't happened at scale yet, but I think very quickly we're going to get to a point where agents communicate with other agents across different enterprises, across different systems. So you kind of, that will allow enterprises to move from having isolated AI tools or agents to really these like connected collaborative ecosystems that reason and act together. So I definitely think that some of this embeddedness is happening already, right? So for example, like DNB has pretty incredible MCP servers that we already expose to customers. We have A2A capabilities. So we're starting to see that embeddedness already. And I think it's only going to get much more pronounced very quickly. So yeah, I think like the vision is sort of like a lot of these interconnected agents powering workflows, powering important decisions, powering analytics behind the scenes, and sort of like seamlessly integrated through protocols like MCP and coordination layers like A2A. Again, I think this is still pretty early stages of that transformation, but I think we're starting to see the curve starting to bend up pretty quickly.
Brilliant. Cool. Oh yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on. Share some great
Likewise.
insights, and yeah,
Thank you.
obviously a hot topic. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for having me on your show. Like really interesting questions. There's a lot going on in the space and things are evolving very quickly. So it's definitely an area to watch and to learn about and to be excited about.
Yep, okay. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, if you could give us a follow, leave a quick review, it just really helps others discover the show. Thank you.
You've been listening to Data Analytics Chat Podcast. Subscribe to our channel for more stories and insights in data and career.